For the 120 years American open-wheel auto racing has existed, racing on dirt, wood planks, road circuits, paved ovals, superspeedways, and even hill climbs, the medium has undeniably classified itself as the most versatile and dynamic of the world's premier car racing championships. People from all over the world have gathered annually in Indianapolis, where a 500-mile car race can move beyond simple sport and transgress upon the boundaries of a religious experience. To watch these cars battle in the world's most prestigious and fastest contest of hot, nasty, badass speed. And while Indianapolis remains a constant in the chronicle of American auto racing, sanctioning bodies, circuits, and schedules have changed considerably since the sport's inception. A lot has changed in 120 years, so that begs the question, where exactly is IndyCar country? Going way back to the beginning, sanctioned auto races were a dashing new hobby for the upper-class Northeasterners on already existing dirt horse racecourses. Then, in 1909, the first races were held at Indianapolis and Crown Point in Indiana as the sport traveled westward, and races were held on ovals and street courses across the country. The first Indianapolis 500-mile race was held in 1911, and the sport continued to grow nationally until the whole World War and collapse of empires thing happened in the late 19-teens. But afterwards, hey, things were looking up, and championship racing was bigger than ever. The big thing for the 1920s were board tracks. Popping up all over the country, these banked ovals were literally made of wood, a good cheap way to modify existing horse race courses or build a new racetrack in any new booming city. But mostly it was California. These early wooden death circuits cemented the Golden State as a second home for speed in this decade. But whoops, the economy just crashed and board tracks are expensive to maintain, so the sport retreated in the Northeast and Midwest in the 1930s, where the Indianapolis 500 remained stalwart in a time where races were not so commonly successful. After the Second World War, Wilbur Shaw and Tony Holman saved Indianapolis, and the sport really boomed with the new perennial events in the South and West, as dirt ovals would be the theme for the next 2 decades. Now we see some familiar names on the schedule such as Milwaukee, and some not so familiar names like Trenton or Langhorne, and even some surprises like Darlington and Daytona. In the 1960s, engines started moving to the back of the cars and speeds really took off. Championship events were held north of the border for the first time, with semi-regular events in Ontario and Quebec. In the 1970s, aerodynamics became the new hip thing, and high-speed ovals like Pocono, Ontario, and Texas World were huge events. The first one-off jaunts overseas began in the 1970s with a race in Argentina, and then a tour of England with events at Silverstone and Brands Hatch. In the 1980s, with the rise of kart, the schedules began to balance out with more road circuits appearing on the schedule, the first appearances in Mid-Ohio, Portland, and Road America, as well as the rise of world-class street races such as Long Beach and Toronto. By now, the hot spots are very apparent, the Midwest and West Coast, and some would say things are starting to get a little too entrenched. When IMS took its race and started its own series in the mid-1990s, the amount of IndyCar races in a given year exploded, with kart racing semi-globally on road and street circuits, while the new IRL raced on an oval-dominant schedule. Then, when kart folded, Champ Car took up its baton for a few years before the weight of the split on the high-budget, high-performance Champ Car series forced its bankruptcy and acquisition by the IRL in the late 2000s, merging the series and ending the split. The new consolidated IndyCar series would then remain as the lone sanctioning body, leading us to the recognizable schedule today, complete with ovals, road, and street courses. Looking at races since 2010, this will look familiar to any regular follower of the series. But comparing it to decades past allows us a chance to see how the sport has evolved over the years. Through the split and its competing series in the late 90s and 2000s, the height of speed and danger throughout the 1980s and 70s, the birth of speed and the rear-engine revolution in the 60s, dirt race era of the 1940s and 50s, the struggle years of the 30s, and the board track boom of the 1920s, and the sport's formative early years before 1920. Adding all these races together gives us a pretty substantial data pool we can use to see trends. If we were to chart out the number of races held in a given state, that could help us show us the haves and have-nots of the IndyCar schedule. Or we could map how many seasons a given state has been present on the schedule. No surprises here for either metric, Indiana and California stand head and shoulders above other states. But there are a few quirky findings. States where we don't have races nowadays, such as Pennsylvania, New York, or Arizona, have been left behind in favor of newer frontiers like Tennessee or Florida. The more maps I made in the process for this video, the less clear the mental image of IndyCar country I had in my mind became. I knew the Midwest and West Coast would be hotspots, but the notable absence of Kentucky, Missouri, and Minnesota shattered those perceptions and shows us the geographic reach of the sport is even lower than I thought, as are notably missing West Coast states like Arizona or Washington. So what have we found? Where exactly is IndyCar country? The best answer I can give is, I don't know, here? A boy can dream about where IndyCar should race next, and where the series' rightful clay is, and the discourse around this exact topic can quickly turn toxic in some race fan circles. Though, future returns to Texas and talks of returns to Mexico are great steps in the right direction, and should fill even the most cynical of fans with optimism of the sport's growth. After all, the series has come a long way and survived a lot for over 100 years. It's always changing and will continue to do so. But what also makes it so special is its strong connection to the past. This championship is the best and most competitive formula in the world, and since the beginning, Indianapolis has been its cultural center. It's hard to think of a better export for the Hoosier state to be known for globally. And that's something every Hoosier, either born or adopted, should be proud of. Alright, bye.
I spread too much love, haters can't keep up with me. I like to eat good, Caesar salad and baked ziti. I got a step light when I mob through the city. I still move swift like Dario Franchitti. Dario Franchitti. Dario Franchitti.